FIFA's world governing body is sending a strong message to President Trump about the 2026 World Cup games. The vice president of FIFA reacted to the president's claim that he can move matches out of U.S. cities that he considers dangerous.
Canada is getting ready to host hundreds of thousands of visitors, potentially during the FIFA 2026 World Cup next summer.
What if I told you the world's biggest sporting event, the FIFA World Cup, just exposed a massive shift in global power? A moment that showed the United States no longer calls all the shots, even on its own turf. When Donald Trump stormed into a press conference and declared that he could move World Cup matches away from U.S. cities he considered unsafe, the world didn't just laugh, it listened. And within hours, FIFA, the most powerful sports body on earth, responded with a quiet but devastating message. Football belongs to the world, not to politics. That moment triggered a chain reaction that no one saw coming. Inside FIFA's Zurich headquarters, Canada and Mexico began to emerge as the true adults in the room, organized, calm, and ready to lead. The U.S., meanwhile, looked like a country too divided to host the planet. This isn't just a sports story. It's a story about control, credibility, and how the balance of global leadership is shifting right in front of our eyes. Welcome to Northern Pulse, and this is how the World Cup became America's latest global embarrassment. It all began with a single sentence. If I think a place isn't safe, we'll move it. That's what Donald Trump told the world in September 2025, referring to the 2026 FIFA World Cup, set to be hosted jointly by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The statement was short, arrogant, and completely unconstitutional in FIFA terms. Within minutes, headlines exploded. Trump threatens to move World Cup matches. FIFA faces political pressure, global outrage over U.S. power play, social media erupted. Political commentators debated whether Trump even understood how the tournament worked. Because the truth was simple, the World Cup doesn't belong to any one country. It's governed by FIFA, and no president, not even a U.S. president, can alter its logistics. Inside FIFA, the mood shifted from confusion to defiance. The organization had spent years coordinating 16 cities across 3 nations, locking in billions in sponsorships, security protocols, and broadcast deals. Trump's declaration threatened to unravel it all. To the world, it looked like another reckless attempt by Washington to dominate something it didn't own. To FIFA, it was an attack on the very idea of global unity through sport. And for the first time, America wasn't the hero of the story, it was the problem. FIFA didn't respond with anger. It responded with elegance, the kind that cuts deeper than any insult. Within hours of Trump's declaration, Victor Montagliani, FIFA's vice president, and notably a Canadian, stepped up to a microphone in Zurich and delivered a masterclass in restraint. His words were calm, but every syllable hit like a hammer. Football is bigger than any government. It will endure beyond every leader, every slogan, every regime. In that single sentence, Montagliani didn't just defend FIFA, he reminded the entire world that no flag, no president, and no political ego can control the world's game. The message was unmistakable. This was FIFA's house, and Trump had just walked in wearing muddy boots. The global response was instant and brutal. European newspapers called Trump's speech an embarrassment for international sport. Latin American broadcasters accused Washington of trying to politicize the sacred. Even American analysts admitted it was a diplomatic disaster, a self-inflicted wound on the world stage. Inside FIFA headquarters, tension turned into quiet determination. Executives began drafting operational contingencies, internal backup plans to minimize risk if U.S. cities became too unstable. For the first time, serious conversations emerged about shifting more games north and south toward Canada and Mexico. FIFA didn't need to argue, it simply acted. Every new memo, every private conversation signaled the same reality. The United States could no longer be trusted to separate politics from sport. Trump had tried to show dominance, but all he showed was desperation. And from that moment on, the World Cup wasn't just a tournament anymore. It was a referendum on America's global credibility. To understand how this moment spiraled, you have to rewind to 2018, when Trump proudly stood before the cameras and celebrated America's joint World Cup victory with Canada and Mexico. Back then, it was painted as a symbol of unity, a North American partnership that would show the world how cooperation beats conflict. Trump himself had signed FIFA's official guarantee, a promise that the United States would welcome every athlete, every fan, every nation without discrimination or politics. It was supposed to be his legacy of inclusion. But fast forward 7 years, and that very promise was shattered by his own words. Instead of projecting unity, Trump stood at a podium declaring that U.S. cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia were too unsafe for the world's biggest celebration. The contrast was devastating. The man who once vowed open arms now spoke like a gatekeeper of chaos. FIFA didn't have to say much, the world said it for them. International media painted a grim picture of America's readiness. The BBC reported record levels of gun violence, more than 500 mass shootings in a single year. Political protests continued to erupt across major cities. And as if that weren't enough, America's notoriously slow visa system was discouraging thousands of fans from even trying to attend. Hosting the World Cup was supposed to showcase the strength of the American dream. Instead, it exposed how fragile that dream had become. The global image of the U.S., once confident, united, and admired, now looked fractured and paranoid. Trump wanted to remind the world that America was in charge. But all he did was remind them how much control it had already lost. While Trump was fighting headlines, Canada was quietly building history. No grandstanding, no chaos, just progress. In Vancouver, construction crews worked day and night to transform the waterfront into one of the most advanced sports districts on the continent. In Toronto, transit upgrades and security plans were being completed months ahead of schedule. Canada wasn't just preparing for the World Cup, it was setting a global example of how to host it. Vancouver's mayor described it perfectly: "We're hosting the equivalent of 30 to 40 Super Bowls in 1 month." Behind that statement wasn't arrogance, it was confidence. Canada had done its homework. It had spent years coordinating with FIFA, ensuring every hotel, stadium, and transport system ran like clockwork. No shouting matches, no political tantrums, just results. And as Trump's America sank deeper into controversy, global media started shifting their tone. The same outlets that once celebrated America's World Cup were now calling Canada the calm hand of North America. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. While Washington fought over control, Ottawa quietly earned respect. Inside FIFA, that difference mattered. Stability is currency in global events, and Canada was overflowing with it. Its leadership projected maturity, reliability, and global trust, the very traits the U.S. had once claimed as its own. As one European commentator put it, Canada is playing chess while America argues over the rulebook. By late 2025, whispers inside FIFA suggested that if anything went wrong in the U.S., Canada could handle more matches, and no one doubted it. In a world addicted to noise, Canada proved that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just gets things done quietly, efficiently, and with dignity. As Washington wrestled with headlines and FIFA's patience wore thin, another player quietly stepped back into the spotlight: Mexico. A nation that had already hosted 2 World Cups in 1970 and 1986, and delivered both with passion, precision, and pride. Mexico knew the game inside out. It didn't need to prove itself to anyone. While the United States stumbled over politics and public perception, Mexico reminded the world that experience still matters. In Mexico City, the government's message was simple: we're ready. Stadiums like the iconic Estadio Azteca had been upgraded, security frameworks finalized, and transportation networks strengthened. Unlike Washington, Mexico wasn't talking about chaos, it was talking about capability. Behind closed doors, Mexican officials even offered to take on additional matches if logistical complications arose north of the border. It wasn't an act of charity, it was strategy. Mexico saw an opportunity. While the U.S. tried to control the narrative, Mexico could quietly control the outcome. In coordination with Canada, it built an efficient North-South alliance that bypassed American bureaucracy and projected calm leadership. The symbolism was powerful: 2 nations once overshadowed by Washington, now working together to steady the global stage. For FIFA, that kind of cooperation was gold. It represented everything the organization wanted the 2026 World Cup to stand for: unity, coordination, and global harmony. As one insider whispered, when the U.S. shouts, Mexico just delivers. By late 2025, FIFA's internal discussions were changing tone. If America's instability grew worse, Mexico wouldn't just host a few extra games, it could anchor the entire southern half of the tournament. In a single move, Mexico turned itself from co-host to cornerstone, proving that quiet confidence beats political theater every time. Deep inside FIFA's Zurich headquarters, the tone had shifted from irritation to strategy. The world's most powerful sports organization wasn't about to make a public spectacle of the U.S. president. It didn't need to. FIFA operates in silence, with contracts, calendars, and codes that speak louder than press conferences ever could. And behind those frosted glass doors, quiet decisions were being made that would change everything. Senior officials began reviewing what they called operational alternates, a sanitized phrase hiding a far more serious reality. They were redrawing the map of the 2026 World Cup. On paper, the U.S. still had 11 host cities, but internally, key matches were being reconsidered. Quarterfinals that were once destined for Los Angeles were now penciled beside Toronto. A semi-final scheduled for New York was being evaluated for Vancouver. The reasons listed sounded technical: climate scheduling, broadcast optimization, logistical balance. But everyone inside knew what those phrases really meant: a quiet loss of faith in America's reliability. The architect behind this shift was none other than Victor Montagliani, the same Canadian vice president who had publicly told Trump that football was bigger than politics. His influence within FIFA had grown enormously, and with it, the belief that Canada and Mexico could shoulder more of the load. There were no leaks to the press, no angry statements, just a subtle realignment. One calendar tweak here, one venue reassignment there. By the time the next FIFA board meeting rolled around, the balance had changed completely. Trump had wanted to command the World Cup. Instead, he triggered a quiet rebellion within FIFA, one fought not with words but with spreadsheets. And in that silence, the world's biggest game began slipping out of America's hands. By late 2025, the message was loud and clear, even if no one dared say it out loud. The United States, once seen as the cornerstone of global leadership, had become a liability. What was meant to be a sporting celebration was turning into a diplomatic embarrassment. The world had just watched FIFA, an independent global institution, stand up to Washington and win. In Europe, headlines told the story plainly: FIFA defies Trump, Canada takes control. Asian media called it the fall of the American host. And in Latin America, journalists said what diplomats were too polite to admit: the world is tired of America's arrogance. The World Cup had become more than a game, it was a global test of credibility, and the United States had failed it. For decades, the world accepted America as the default leader. It ran the financial systems, dictated trade rules, and dominated pop culture. But in this moment, this seemingly small dispute over football, something bigger broke. The illusion of automatic authority vanished. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico represented everything America used to stand for: stability, cooperation, and quiet confidence. Their leadership wasn't about bluster, it was about balance. FIFA's quiet realignment became symbolic of a much larger truth. The world is moving on, creating new centers of power, new voices of reliability. The US can still shout, but fewer are listening. In a single tournament, the global narrative flipped. America no longer looked like the world's referee, it looked like the player who couldn't follow its own rules. When FIFA's revised tournament schedules quietly circulated through the organization's encrypted servers, the writing was on the wall. Canada and Mexico weren't just co-hosts anymore, they were becoming the new center of gravity. More matches in Vancouver and Toronto, more primetime slots in Mexico City and Guadalajara, and fewer marquee moments inside the United States. There were no press conferences, no fiery statements. Just silence, the kind that speaks volumes. FIFA didn't need to announce America's demotion, it let the schedule do it for them. Every relocated match was a subtle act of judgment, every reassigned city a quiet message to Washington. Reliability matters more than rhetoric. For Canada, this was validation. Years of disciplined planning and calm diplomacy had paid off. The world's biggest sporting event was now showcasing Canadian stability on a global stage. The tourism boom, the infrastructure upgrades, the pride, it was all coming together. For Mexico, it was vindication, a nation once overshadowed by its northern neighbor now reclaiming its place as a global host with unmatched passion and professionalism. Meanwhile, inside the US, the mood was defensive. Officials claimed nothing had changed, but the world knew better. Cameras were already shifting north and south, and so was the prestige. By 2026, when fans from across the globe pour into North America, it won't be Washington leading the welcome. It'll be Vancouver, it'll be Toronto, it'll be Mexico City. The spotlight that once belonged to the United States now shines where it's earned, on nations that didn't demand attention, they deserved it. And that's how the world's most watched event quietly rewrote the story of power, trust, and leadership, without a single political speech. In the end, this was never just about football, it was about the fall of illusion. The 2026 FIFA World Cup was supposed to be America's chance to remind the world that it still led, still commanded respect, still owned the global stage. But instead, it became a mirror, reflecting a nation divided, distracted, and declining in influence. Trump's demand to control the tournament wasn't a show of power, it was a cry for relevance. And FIFA's quiet defiance was the world's answer: you don't own everything anymore. As the games draw closer, the symbolism is impossible to ignore. Canada and Mexico, once the junior partners in a North American alliance, have emerged as the reliable hosts, the voices of order in a storm of chaos. Their calm, their preparation, their quiet confidence have become the new face of global leadership. Meanwhile, America, the country that once exported hope, unity, and spectacle, now exports controversy and confusion. The nation that built the global dream is now struggling to live up to it. When the first whistle blows in 2026, it won't just mark the beginning of a tournament. It'll mark a transformation. A changing of the guard from the loudest to the most dependable, from the empire that shouted to the nations that simply delivered. Trump wanted to prove America still ran the world. Instead, he proved that the world had learned to run without it. And as the spotlight fades from Washington and shines across Vancouver, Toronto, and Mexico City, one truth becomes clear. The next era of leadership belongs not to those who demand control, but to those who earn it.